Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News, and after Mercedes claims that Red Bull have been exploiting a loophole in the regulations to gain an unfair competitive advantage, the FIA seem to agree that this could well be the case, and Christian Horner is trying to strike down the technical directive that might well cause a compromise in Red Bull's performance for the rest of this season. Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comment section below, hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new. As always, I'd greatly appreciate. Plenty to discuss today. Firstly, this on the Red Bull front, Red Bull and Porsche, we kind of heard the rumours that Audi wants to come in with Sauber, kick out Alfa Romeo, I guess. Not exactly sure what the relationship is going to be there, but Porsche and Red Bull are going to effectively partner up in terms of Red Bull powertrains, I'm guessing, and kind of effectively produce the engines from 2026. Quite a while away, but yeah, Porsche entering Formula 1. Exciting stuff, I suppose, apparently going to be announced later this week during the Austrian Grand Prix, which is this weekend. It's race week once again. Now, Sebastian Vettel has also mentioned this, because definitely we want to talk about Aston Martin a bit here, because they copied effectively the Red Bull car, the green Red Bull as was being described, but certainly in performance it's way off the Red Bull, as you'd expect. But one of the reasons for that might be that the actual Red Bull team, Oracle Red Bull Racing or whatever, are using this kind of floor flexing advantage that other teams haven't, and Mercedes are saying, well look, let's have a look at this one, FIA, to see if anything is happening here. And Christian Horner and Mattia Binotto aren't apparently so happy that the FIA is doing this, and they're going to try and get around it. Whether Aston Martin agree with them or agree with other teams that maybe they should stop doing this is a question we shall see. But Vettel also says he's had some decent results lately, just in terms of where he's finished the races, but in terms of qualifying, like, it's been an absolute disaster, their car. It's really tough for Vettel, right? You look at Vettel, you look at Alonso, you think of the way their last few years have been, tough scenes. Like, I mean, yeah, he reckons that in the next 3 rounds before, I guess, the summer break, he's going to see what the situation is, right? And if their car doesn't improve, then, you know, he might well just chalk it off for next season. Who knows what's going to happen there? But of course, lately, Mercedes have been outscoring Ferrari in a remarkable turn of events. Over the last 5 races, Mercedes have scored 109 points, Ferrari only 108, right? So that's rather interesting to consider that Mercedes, I guess, catching Ferrari for P2 in the constructors. And well, who knows how the rest of the season goes, especially because the rumour has it right now, and Mercedes believe this might well be the case, as do the FIA, that this anti-porpoising directive is coming into play. The initial idea of this was that teams like Mercedes that might be bouncing too much around Baku have to raise their ride height in order to make sure that's not the case. Now, it turns out, after all is said and done, it might actually be Red Bull that get most affected by this, based on another element, a lesser known element of the technical directive related to the flooring of the car that is only allowed to flex by 2mm. Now, this still kind of remains rumours for now, as is kind of described in these tweets right here, but the idea is that a flexible floor is being used by Red Bull and Ferrari potentially. Effectively, the FIA say that, okay, the floor can't flex more than 2mm, but they're only going to test it in this place and this place. Therefore, teams may well have done. Therefore, teams like Ferrari and Red Bull are rumoured to have been making the floor flex more than that in other areas, up to about 6mm, 5-6mm is the rumour, so that, well, of course, the FIA doesn't test there, and, well, it's not in the spirit of the regulations or whatever, and this flexible floor means they can run the car with a higher rake and effectively generate the downforce they want to without worrying so much about the bouncing and also about potential wear on those parts, right? So Mercedes, I guess, have been somewhat confused as to how when they try and run their car like Red Bull does, like they're bouncing around all over the shop, and Red Bull seemingly are not, and maybe this is one of the reasons why that might well be the case. So certainly this is some of the talking points here. You can kind of look at the underside of the car and the fact that only certain parts of this flooring kind of plate, I guess they're describing it as, actually get tested for the flexibility, and it seems like the teams have used kind of, well, titanium strips or titanium supports to make sure that those parts of the car that get tested for the flexibility don't flex more than is allowed, but the other parts might be able to, right? So that's kind of the key element here. Apparently Red Bull have been doing this with these kind of titanium supports, and seemingly, well, potentially Ferrari as well. Mercedes say they're not doing this. They seemingly see something in the regulations here now that might have been able to be exploited. They say, like, well, we realise now there's certain opportunities that we had not grasped or exploited, so clarification with the FIA will not impact the way we run our car, but could well affect our competitors. Mercedes are hoping the FIA clamps down on this, as they say they will, but of course the teams that are potentially doing this, Red Bull and Ferrari, are not just going to sit there and say, okay, yeah, fair enough, you caught us or whatever, like, let's just, chalk it off, and potentially, who knows how much this will affect, like, the performance of their car. But it might be a tenths difference, it might be 2 tenths difference, I don't know, who really knows, but like, that could mean that Mercedes, the difference that they currently have, like, of course they were pretty much there or thereabouts the fastest car around Silverstone. Other circuits that might not be the case, but if they're a tenth or 2 tenths closer just because Red Bull and Ferrari have to peg it back a little bit, then, Mercedes all of a sudden might be right there on, capable of winning races on merit. That, of course, is, a theory. We don't really know how this is going to work in reality, but of course Red Bull and Ferrari don't want to allow that to be the case, and Red Bull especially in this situation, right? So lots to talk about this, right? And effectively, like, Christian Horner's had some thoughts on it. He says, well, this is a problem, isn't it? On the fact that this technical directive is going to kind of like change the regulations in a way. Effectively, he says, like, the original regulations outline it in this way, and therefore that's the way it's, mentioned in in the initial regulations. Therefore, like, why should they be able to change that mid-season? The regulations need to be black and white. I think we end up with encyclopedias that are sometimes way too complicated. There's no such thing as the intent of the regulations. It's a binary thing. This I thought was a rather interesting comment, right? Because he's effectively saying the FIA says the floor can't deflect by more than 2 millimeters in this location and this location on the floor. Therefore, we made it not deflect by more than 2 millimeters on those particular locations. But potentially the other parts of the floor can deflect by more, which supposedly the way the regulations were written implied that the whole thing shouldn't be able to deflect by more than 2 millimeters. But the way it was actually like explicitly discussed was that only those 2 particular locations, right? So it's an interesting one, but certainly the way Horner's describing it makes me kind of think that they probably are doing this, right? Because he's saying like there's no such thing as intent, and that it's either a yes or no, whereas I'm sure the people who wrote the regulations would say that actually the intent was that the entire floor should be 2 millimeters. So that's a rather interesting thing. There is an F1 commission meeting this week where the teams will discuss this, because apparently right now this is kind of in a draft stage, and we shall see if anything actually happens as a result of it, right? And even as Horner goes on to say, he's kind of declined to give an answer as to whether he'll challenge the technical directive, which probably means that he'll try to. I think the process is the thing to discuss as well. A technical directive shouldn't be regulatory changes. There's a governance and a process for that. So I think we just need to talk through exactly why it's necessary, because he was also talking about, Silverstone, the fact that there wasn't much porpoising, to saying, okay, is this porpoising, directed technical directive really necessary? But it's actually, like, at least the last few days or so, it's the second part about the floor kind of flexing that is causing more controversy and talking points than the actual anti-porpoising stuff that this was initially introduced after Baku to try and correct. A very interesting situation, really. And the question is, right, if Christian Horner and potentially Mattia Binotto as well from Ferrari and Red Bull respectively are going to come through and say, yeah, we're not happy about this, we're not happy with the FIA introducing these technical directives, we don't want this to be the case, arguably because they don't want the second part of that technical directive to come in as kind of the key issue here. That's at least what Mercedes are theorizing right now. But it's not just them that are interested in this, right? Because a lot of the team principals aren't happy about this idea that the FIA can come through and say, you've got to raise your ride height by this amount, right? There's one team boss supposedly said, what will be next? A wet track metric that forces us to change from slicks to inters when a certain amount of rain has fallen, right? Ideas like this, okay, allowing the FIA this level of control where they can look at your car and say, okay, you're bouncing too much, you've got to raise your ride height by 10 millimeters or so. That's the idea of the first part of the kind of technical directive that's coming into place. And therefore, it seems like Horner is trying to say, because that part of the TD might not be agreed upon by everyone, therefore let's just scrap the entire thing and not deal with the second part that might affect Red Bull more than other teams. So that's the question that they're going to have to answer over the coming days. But as I was kind of wondering, even if that first part does get struck down, does the second part remain, right? And I'm sure Horner's going to try and say to the other teams as well, the regulations need to be black and white, otherwise it's too complicated, and there's no such thing as intent as we just looked at. I think with a commission meeting, there's more things on the agenda, and maybe 2 hours won't be quite enough to get through everything, right? So we shall see what happens this week and whether teams agree on this. But that's the question really about the Aston Martin side, because I imagine, you can see how similar the side pod here of this Aston Martin looks like to the Red Bull, and I'm sure they're thinking, okay, hang on a second here, we copied the Red Bull effectively, and there was all this drama about, okay, did they steal data from the Red Bull team, whatever. Turned out that wasn't really the case, but of course their car's still much slower than the Red Bull, and they're probably thinking, hang on a second, like, how is this Red Bull still so much quicker than us? Of course there's other features of the car as well that make them quicker, but maybe part of it is the flooring, the way it's been designed. Of course you can't see that from the side design of the car right here, but also this maybe plate on the floor, and now Aston Martin might be coming into this meeting thinking, okay, hang on a second, maybe we aren't so happy that the FIA can just decide what ride height we have to run our cars at in certain situations, even though of course that is for the benefit of the health of the drivers, which is the kind of the key point that the FIA actually came up with this after Baku, right, and the issues that Hamilton especially had during the race. Other drivers of course complained about it as well. That was the idea on most tracks. With the new updates that the cars have, doesn't seem to be so much of an issue nowadays, but I'm sure and therefore teams might look at the second part of that TD and say, well, hang on a second here, if Red Bull and Ferrari have been using this and few other teams have, then maybe we should vote in favour of having this happen all across the board. And I'm sure Mercedes will also be voting in favour, as it gives them a chance to catch up or overtake or whatever the teams at the front of the grid. So it is certainly a dynamic situation. The other part of this as well was that Mercedes did actually admit after this weekend that they could have been disqualified from the Baku Grand Prix with the new kind of technical directive coming into place, right? But nowadays I think they're more confident in the design of the setup of their car, if the new rules of porpoising come in as they do from the French Grand Prix, then if other tracks behave, if the W13 behaves on other tracks like it did in Baku, they could be at risk of getting disqualified again, or effectively the FIA have said, if your car's bouncing too much, you got to raise the ride height, but Mercedes said that actually we can't do that for various reasons, or it doesn't help for various reasons as well. So there's a few reasons why this TD, currently in a draft stage, doesn't actually make that much sense, but it's the second part of it that probably most teams will agree with that should be the case, because the intent of the regulation seems to be the floor can only flex by this. Apparently Red Bull have been doing more than that, and maybe that's what kind of seen in their actions, trying to shut this down as much as they possibly can. But of course this technical directive doesn't come into play yet. It comes in for the French Grand Prix on, I believe, the 24th of July is when that race is. But this weekend, of course, we're in Austria once again. And there's been some talk about, okay, which car does it favour? Because, of course, going to Austria, Verstappen there's going to have a big crowd in support. And then, well, of course, Red Bull is kind of their home race, right, as a company, as an organisation. So, yeah, the corners have short radii, long straights, potentially to play into Red Bull's hand. So, certainly for this weekend, this could be where we see Red Bull as it currently is, like potentially for the last time this season as the quickest car it's going to be, with potentially these changes being made for France. If the TD comes into play as the Mercedes want it to, and potentially it could be another damage limitation weekend for Ferrari, and who knows, how much it will affect Red Bull and Ferrari if even these rumours are true, or if it's basically irrelevant to the performance of their car. We shall see, but it makes the season increasingly unpredictable. And just to mention this as we close out, this is a kind of remarkable. The last 6 drivers who have had their maiden pole position and maiden victory on the same weekend: Lewis Hamilton at Canada 2007, Vettel in Italy 2008, Mark Webber, Nico Rosberg, Pastor Maldonado, of course, at Spain 2012. And it's been 10 years since a driver got their first ever pole position and their first victory in the same weekend. Sainz, of course, achieved that at the Silverstone Grand Prix this past weekend. But very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new as always, take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.